She kissed her baby, laced her boots, and vanished into the mist. For 5 years, not a trace. No footprints, no answers, just silence. Until a tourist, far off the beaten path, spotted something strange wedged in stone. What he found would unravel one of the most haunting disappearances in modern hiking history. A mother's final choice. A hidden message. A heartbreaking act of love frozen in time. This isn't just a mystery. It's a story of sacrifice, survival, and a bond that refused to die. What happened to Claire and her daughter will stay with you forever. It was a bright June morning when Claire Dawson, a spirited 31-year-old teacher and first-time mom, set out on what should have been a peaceful weekend hike. The Misty Peaks Trail had always been her sanctuary. Rolling green hills, soft golden, light through the trees, and winding dirt paths that promised quiet, fresh air, and freedom. With her 11-month-old daughter Elsie secured snugly in a soft gray carrier against her chest, Claire smiled wide for a selfie. That photo, her pink floral shirt glowing under the sun, her baby sucking on a pacifier beneath a mint-green sun hat, would become the last anyone saw of them alive. They vanished without a sound dot at first. No one panicked. Claire was known to unplug during hikes. But as dusk fell and she missed her check-in call with her husband Mark, concern bloomed into dread. Within hours, local authorities launched a full-scale search. Helicopters hovered over the rugged terrain, search dogs combed trails, and volunteers shouted their names through fog-drenched woods. But Claire and Elsie had disappeared as if swallowed by the earth dot in those early days. Mark stood before news cameras, clutching a small stuffed bunny from Elsie's crib. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking. "If you've seen anything at all, come forward. My girls are out there somewhere. I know it." For weeks they searched. Every ravine, ridge, and trailhead. The mist rolled in heavy and constant, cloaking the land in an eerie, soundless gray. Park rangers whispered about how easily one wrong step could mean a fatal fall. But Claire wasn't reckless. She was cautious, meticulous, especially with Elsie in her arms. As days turned into weeks, then months, hope withered, tips dried up. The official search was called off 43 days later. All they had were footprints that abruptly stopped near a fork in the trail. No blood, no broken branches, no sign of struggle. It was as if the mountain itself had closed its mouth and swallowed them whole. Mark refused to let go. He returned. Every weekend, retracing steps, calling their names into the silence. He left tiny wind chimes in the trees, hoping maybe, somehow, Claire would hear. But with every passing season, the world moved on, except him, and except Claire's sister Julia, who clung to one thing. Claire always said she'd protect Elsie with her life, so if she's gone, she didn't go alone. 5 years would pass, 5 agonizing, unanswered years. And then one day, a lone hiker stepped off the path, a path no one had walked since the Dawsons vanished, and spotted something wedged between 2 ancient rocks. Faded fabric, a familiar carrier, sunlight barely touching it, something that had been waiting quietly all along. After the official search was called off, the forest grew quiet. The once bustling Misty Peaks Trail returned to stillness. No more search parties. No more helicopters slicing through the morning fog. Nature reclaimed what it always does. Grass covered faint footprints. Winds erased the last echoes of names shouted into the trees. Claire and Elsie had become ghosts, their absence a heavy weight in the hearts of everyone who knew them. Mark Dawson, husband, father, now a shell of a man, refused to give up. Their cozy home slowly turned into a shrine of grief. Elsie's nursery remained untouched. Tiny socks still in drawers, books waiting unread on the shelf. Every night, Mark sat in that room with the baby monitor turned on. No sound ever came, but still he waited, just in case. Every year on the anniversary, he walked the same trail with a candle in one hand and Claire's scarf in the other. She wouldn't have just given up. He whispered to anyone who would listen. She would have fought. For Elsie, she would have fought. Claire's sister Julia became the voice of relentless hope. While most people moved on, she kept Claire alive on missing person boards, in online forums, and on local radio shows. There's no way she just disappeared. She's somewhere. I feel it, she'd say. And people called her delusional, even cruel. But Julia didn't care. She knew Claire. She knew her sister's fierce will. Rumors and theories began to circulate. Maybe Claire had fallen into a ravine, or gotten lost and succumbed to the elements. Others whispered darker stories, that someone might have taken them. One internet thread went viral with speculation that the baby's pacifier, found months later, 12 miles from the trailhead, was planted to mislead. Nothing added up. No tracks, no belongings, no signs of a struggle. Just ... nothing ... As time passed, the Dawson case faded from headlines. Other tragedies replaced theirs. But for Mark and Julia, time stood still. Mark quit his job and withdrew from the world. Some days, he sat for hours at the trailhead, staring into the trees, hoping to hear the faint giggle of a child or the sound of Claire's footsteps. Julia kept a map pinned on her wall with red strings, tracking every unsearched corner of Misty Peaks, sending emails to rangers, begging them to revisit areas. Yet the mountain held its secret, and through it all, the weight of not knowing was the cruelest part. There were no goodbyes, no closure, just an endless loop of what if. What if she had survived? What if help was just minutes too late? What if they'd taken a different path? Then came the 5th summer, a dry season. Trails that had been closed for years reopened, and far from the main path, deep where the moss grew thick and ancient stones towered like sentinels, a man named Lucas Hart decided to wander. He had no idea he was about to answer the question that haunted a family for 5 long years. It was just supposed to be another hike. Lucas Hart, a quiet 38-year-old travel blogger from Vermont, had no idea his weekend escape into the Misty Peaks would turn into a discovery that would shake an entire community. He wasn't searching for anything, just peace, a chance to unplug. His plan was to avoid the marked trails, to explore the forgotten corners of the forest, where the trees grew thicker and the silence felt sacred. It was late afternoon when Lucas veered off the main path, chasing a patch of light that filtered through a crack in the trees. What caught his attention first was the stillness, a strange kind of hush that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The birds had stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. He spotted a narrow crevice between 2 massive boulders, almost too tight for a person to slip through, overgrown with vines and tree roots curling like ancient veins. Something inside him urged him forward. He pressed himself sideways, inching through the cold rock walls. It was there, wedged in the shadows, bathed in a soft shaft of sunlight, that he saw it. A faded, dust-covered baby carrier, pale blue, still, upright, perfectly intact, like someone had placed it there gently and never came back. Lucas froze, his breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he thought it might be some lost hiker's gear. But then he saw something else, a tiny sun hat, impossibly small, weathered by time, but unmistakably meant for a child. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone and snapped a picture. He didn't know who Claire Dawson was. Not yet. But his instincts screamed that this was important, that he'd just stumbled into something much, much bigger than himself. Hours, rangers arrived. They cordoned off the area. And as more gear was uncovered, A torn corner of a pink floral shirt, a cracked plastic pacifier nestled between roots. The pieces began to form a picture that hadn't been seen in 5 long years. The carrier, experts said, had been shielded by the rocks from weather and wildlife. It had been wedged so tightly, so precisely, it took 2 rescue workers to pull it free. And beneath it all, buried under time and silence, they found the remains. Claire hadn't fallen. She had crawled. Evidence suggested she had squeezed through the gap carrying her baby, likely injured, probably disoriented or desperate to find a shortcut back to the trail. But at some point, she must have realized she couldn't go any further, that she was stuck. And so she did the only thing she could. She secured Elsie in the carrier, upright, protected, away from the cold stone floor. She made a choice. She chose to give her daughter a chance, even if it cost her everything. Forensic teams worked in quiet reverence. No one spoke loudly. No one needed to. They had just uncovered the answer to a mystery that had haunted the mountains and broken a family. And they had found something else too, a mother's final act of love, hidden away in a crevice the world had forgotten. The recovery team moved slowly, as though afraid to disturb the silence that had guarded this hidden tomb for half a decade. The narrow stone passage, where Claire Dawson had taken her final steps, wasn't marked on any map. It was a natural gap, a geological accident, easily missed by even the most experienced hikers. And yet it had become the last refuge for a mother desperately trying to save her child. As the search crew peeled back the layers of time, piece by piece, they found more than just physical evidence. They uncovered a story of fear, hope, and extraordinary courage, written not in words, but in choices. Claire's torn floral shirt was pressed against the wall, as if she had used it to cushion her daughter, or perhaps as a signal to rescuers. Near it, tucked inside the carrier's side pocket, was a small battered phone with a shattered screen and a dead battery. When charged days later, it revealed no calls, but a series of heartbreaking video clips and voice recordings that stopped. The investigators' cold. In the dim light of the crevice, a weak, trembling voice could be heard. "If you find this, please tell Mark one tried. Tell him I didn't stop. I just couldn't get out. I didn't want Elsie to be scared. So I sang to her until she fell asleep." There were 6 recordings in total, each more fragile than the last. The final one ended not with words, but with soft humming, a lullaby. A mother comforting her baby with the last breath she had. Even hardened rescue workers wept as they listened. According to forensics, Claire had likely suffered a fractured ankle from a fall near the edge of a ravine, forcing her off the main trail. She had tried to shortcut her way back, but the terrain grew steeper, wilder. Somewhere along the detour, she made it into the crevice, either seeking shelter from the weather or believing it might lead out. But it was a trap, a stone maze, with no exit. She had climbed in, child in arms, and never made it out. But Elsie had been cradled safely in the carrier the entire time, her tiny body protected from the cold stone by layers of her mother's clothing. And what stunned authorities most was the positioning. Claire had propped the carrier upright, using her own body as support, wedged beneath and around it like a brace. When she could no longer move, she had become the wall that held her daughter. Above the dirt and darkness, it was an act of pure, primal love, quiet, uncelebrated, unknown until now. And there was one more piece of the puzzle. Inside Claire's backpack, zipped into a side pocket that miraculously remained dry, was her digital camera. It still worked. The final photos broke hearts around the world. The last one, time-stamped at 10:03 a.m. on the morning of her disappearance, showed Claire standing at the edge of the rock gap, sweat on her brow, smiling nervously, baby Elsie nestled tight against her chest. Behind her, the world stretched out in peace. Ahead of her, the shadows waited. Another photo, taken a few minutes later, was blurry, likely accidental, but it showed Claire's hand reaching into the gap, feeling her way forward. She had no idea she would never return. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. Vigils were held, candles lit, letters sent from mothers around the country who saw in Claire not just a missing hiker, but a hero, a protector, a symbol of the kind of love that endures even when all hope is lost. Mark, upon hearing the truth, could barely speak. At the press conference, his voice cracked as he read a short statement. She gave everything. She made sure our daughter lived. Claire was strong. She never stopped being strong. Then, through tears, he added, I miss her every day. But now, I finally know what happened. I finally know. Julia, Claire's sister, clutched the baby carrier with trembling hands when it was returned. She kept her promise, she whispered. She kept her safe. In the end, what remained wasn't just a backpack, a pacifier, or a handful of pictures. What remained was the story of a mother who fought until her last breath, who turned a dark, lonely stone passage into a place of hope, and who, without fanfare, became a legend not because she survived, but because she loved, even as she faded into silence. The news of Claire Dawson's discovery swept through the nation like a slow-moving wave of grief and awe. For 5 years, her story had lingered like a cold breeze, a mystery, a headline, a whispered tragedy that faded from public view. But now, with the truth unearthed from that silent crevice in Misty Peaks, her story was reborn, no longer a mystery, but a monument, no longer about vanishing, but about sacrifice and love. In the days that followed the recovery, thousands gathered online and in person to mourn a woman most had never met. Memorial pages overflowed with messages, mothers writing about the nights they clutched their children tighter after hearing Claire's story, hikers who walked the trail with new reverence, strangers who wept quietly watching the news footage of the recovered baby carrier and the final photograph. Mark Dawson, Claire's husband, hadn't spoken publicly much in the years following her disappearance. But now, standing at the base of Misty Peaks Trail, with a sea of candles behind him and his now 6-year-old daughter by his side, he found the strength. For 5 years, I lived in 2 worlds, he said, voice trembling. One where I hoped Claire and Elsie would walk through that door, and one where I feared they never would. But I never imagined a world where I would find out that Claire never stopped fighting, that she stayed, that she held on. He paused, swallowed back tears, and looked down at Elsie, who clutched his hand. My daughter is alive today because her mother made a choice. Not in a hospital, not in a moment of glory, but in silence. In the dark, alone, and no one saw it. No one cheered for her. She did it anyway. That's who Claire was. Elsie, too young to remember the hike, still carried echoes of her mother in her. The way she tilted her head when she was curious, the way she smiled with her whole face, the calmness she brought into every room. Mark never let her forget, not for a single day. Your mommy was a hero, he told her every night, and she loved you more than anything in this world. In the wake of the discovery, Claire's sister Julia spearheaded a memorial initiative. With support from the community, a section of the Misty Peaks Trail was renamed Claire's Walk. At the start of the path, a wooden sign carved with her name stands beneath a plaque engraved with her final recorded words. Tell him I tried. Tell him I didn't stop. Further up the trail, a small bench overlooks the very ridge Claire once stood on, the place where she took her last smiling photo. Visitors leave flowers, toys, letters. Some come to grieve. Others come to say, thank you. And then something unexpected happened. Claire's story became a movement, Not viral in a fleeting, sensational way, but soulfully, quietly. Schools began teaching her story during safety training. A children's hiking foundation was launched in her name to provide GPS trackers and survival tools to families who hike with kids. Mothers' groups cited her story as a symbol of strength. Trauma counselors shared it as a way to help others understand grief, survival, and the power of love in the face of hopelessness. Not one woman, one weekend hike, one unimaginable choice. And yet the ripples continue. Even years later, people still speak of her as if she's just around the bend in the trail, smiling gently, baby held close to her chest. The image of Claire, propping up that carrier with her broken body, is now etched into the memory of the mountain itself. A quiet monument not made of stone, but of devotion. And as for Elsie, she grows up in the shadow of that great love, unaware, at first of the weight she carries, but one day she will know. One day she will stand at that trail with her father, and he will show her where her mother last stood. He will tell her the full story, and she will understand that her life was not simply spared. It was given by a woman who died alone, but not in vain. A woman who vanished into the silence and returned as a voice for so many, for every parent who's ever faced fear, for every lost soul in the woods, for every person who needs to know that even in the deepest dark, love does not falter. Claire Dawson never made it home, but in the end, she became something more than a headline. She became a story that stayed, a story that mattered, a story that will never, ever be forgotten. Some stories don't end with a rescue. Some stories end with sacrifice, with love that doesn't shout, doesn't need to be seen, only felt. Claire Dawson didn't get a second chance. She didn't make it home, but she didn't vanish. She endured. In the cold, in the dark, in the silence. She chose to stay. She chose to be a shelter, a shield, a mother to the very end. And somehow that love, unspoken, unseen, found its way back to us. 5 years later, through a quiet crevice in the earth, through a man who took a step off the trail, through a story the mountain was finally ready to give back. We often speak of heroes like they wear capes. But sometimes a hero is just a woman holding her child in the rain, whispering lullabies until her voice runs out. Claire may not be with us, but her love is. In every step we take on that trail, in every breath her daughter takes, in every heart that remembers her name. So if you ever find yourself in the misty peaks, and the wind falls silent, and the trees seem to listen, know that you're not alone. She's there.